Okay, hi everybody. Wait a minute. We have to wait for the Tel Aviv International Synagogue, and there we go. Okay, we're on. Ah, hi. How are you? I hope everybody's doing well. I hope you're taking care of yourself, no matter where. It's been a very, what should we say, um, roller coaster type week, especially for those in the United States. And a lot of us feel like I'm here in Israel. Even here in Israel, we feel like sometimes things get clouded. So Chazal always said, "Choshesh barosho yasok b'Torah." If you are confused or if you have a headache or whatever, so the best thing to do is to study Torah. The truth of the matter is that Chazal said that was good for everything. It was the chicken soup for the Jewish soul, to quote that the famous book by Yetta Halberstam. So let's get to it. I'd like to start by saying something about the late Rabbi Lord Sachs. I only met him once, and it was really on the fly. I had just published an article many years ago in a journal that he used to edit called La'ela, and we literally bumped into each other in front of the great synagogue. And it's a something I regret. I regret that we didn't have a personal relationship. However, like all of Am Yisrael, I've learned a tremendous amount from his words and from his from his writings. His capacity to communicate, his capacity to be able to take Judaism and to make it available and accessible to an amazingly, an incredibly broad community of Jews and non-Jews is really quite remarkable. It's Maimonidean in its breadth, and I think he, like others who unfortunately we have lost this year, this horrific annus horribilis, as I think Queen Elizabeth once said. Um, the He embodies something which Chazal said, that Einhen lefashot l'tzadikim divreim hem zichronim, that you really need not make large cenotaphs and mausolea for the righteous or for the sages, because their words stand the test of time, and they are their memorial, and that's what we hope for. I'm sure will be the case with the late Rabbi Sachs. Okay, we are in the middle of discussing Shimon ben Shetach. Last week we got sidetracked in terms of discussing his history, and today I want to. I mean, there's a lot to say about him, and there's not a course on Chazal. For that, I recommend. Actually, I recommend Rabbi Benny Lau's book, The Sages, which goes through all of the people in Pirkei Avot and all of the rabbis that are mentioned in the Talmud, and I strongly recommend it. It's a good, popular, but responsible study of the rabbis and their teachings in their context. Let's take a look at just what he says in Pirkei Avot. Shimon ben Shetach Omer. Shimon ben Shetach was wont to say, "Hevei marbe lachkor et ha'idim, v'hevei zahir b'dvarecha shema mitocham yilmedu l'shaker." When you interrogate witnesses, don't hold back. Make point of asking as many questions from as many angles as you possibly can. But be very careful. Be very careful when you ask the questions that you not ask leading questions. Leading questions in two directions. And here I'm basing myself on the comments made by the various commentators. Not leading questions to the extent that you will have have them say things that you want them to say, as it were, and similarly, don't give them leading questions to the extent that they will be able to understand from your line of questioning, what they will, to sort of like adjust what they know to what you think the right answer is. You find that sometimes when you hear reports of Supreme Court hearings, that from the questions that the judge asks, you can have a sense of where he's going. That is specifically what what Shimon ben Shetach is saying. Don't do. On the one hand, probe as much as humanly possible, but keep distance. Because at the end of the day, the testament al pi shnayim edim o shlosha edim yakum davar. Everything depends. We in halacha we don't have circumstantial evidence. We don't use all kinds of other things, at least in a court proceeding. So in psak halacha it's something else. But in a court proceeding, everything rises and falls on the witnesses. Since everything rises or falls on the witnesses, then you have to probe as much as possible to get to the truth to the degree that that is possible. Now, that apparently, or prima facie, would seem to be an obvious thing to decide, an obvious thing to do. But you know what? It has a there were a number of different assumptions in Shimon ben Shetach's statement, which are not given. They are not so obvious. How are they not so obvious? First of all, there is an assumption that we can get to the truth. If you can assume that that we can get to the truth, or at least approximate the truth, that means that there is truth. Now, that might seem to be a somewhat unusual statement to make. Of course, there's truth, and maybe up until 30, 40 years ago, in fact, everything I said could be seen to be totally superfluous. But the fact of the matter is that in our society, the idea that there's truth and that there's an absolute truth to which one should aspire to come close, to approximate, to know, is not a given. On the contrary, we live in a world in which the emphasis on narratives, and maybe it's this way, maybe it's that way. There's no truth, and words don't mean anything, or words don't mean what they think they mean, and everything is very, very fluid. The assumption of Shimon ben Shetach is that the more that you probe, the more that you responsibly interrogate the witnesses, the closer you will get to truth, because there is a truth, and there is a truth that can be established, and upon which justice will be done. Hevei marbel l'chor ta'idim, because all that is missing when we want to try to get to the bottom of things, as it were, is the honest effort on the part of the investigators. In this case, the judges, because they, in halacha, they are the ones who do the primary work. So that's number one. So it's something to think about, because it's not such a given today. Number two. Havei marbel achor ta'idim. Rabbi Matityahu Yitzhari, who was an interesting fellow on his own. He lived in the early part of the 15th century. He was a Spanish scholar who had a very distinguished public career as well as a rabbinical career. He participated and tried to defend the Talmud during the great disputation of Tortosa in the early part of the 15th century, when the Catholic Church put it on trial for the whichever number of time. And he left behind a very, very interesting and important commentary on on Pirkei Avot. Some of you might have studied at Touro College in the United States. Some of you might have done an advanced degree at Touro College in the United States. So the Dean of Jewish Studies the Dean of Jewish Studies at Touro College in the United States, Rabbi Professor Michael Schmidman, actually wrote his doctorate about Matityahu Yitzhari. He did a wonderful job, and the book has actually been recently, he didn't publish it, but the book has recently been published by a colleague of mine at Bar Ilan, whose name was Professor Yaakov Spiegel. And those of you who collect, I know people do this, collect commentaries on Pirkei Avot, like they collect Haggadot. So you might, I strongly recommend it. So Rabbi Matityahu Yitzhari, in his commentary, makes a connection between Shimon ben Shetach's statement here and a statement in the in a statement to the Mishnah. In the Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin, this is also the Mishnah, but another Mishnah elsewhere, not associated with Shimon ben Shattach, but he wants to make the connection. What does the Mishnah say in Sanhedrin? The Mishnah in Sanhedrin says that, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin says that the one of the things that one does before one brings witnesses in to testify is that one warns them, or one, it really means threaten, what the Mishnah says. How does one threaten, or how does one put the ema? How does one put awe? How do you overawe the witnesses? And you tell them, look, what you're doing is a sacred task. Giving testimony is a mitzvah. When you're called to court in a Beit Din and you go and you testify, you are fulfilling a mitzvah. Because tzedek, justice, is one of the names of God, and therefore anyone who participates in the search for, or the establishment of justice is in fact doing a mitzvah. And you will have to put the fear of God into the witnesses. Now, when it comes to civil cases, you try to point out the ramifications of not telling the truth. In other words, this is a serious business, and it's not just money; it's a lot more than that, and therefore you have to take it seriously. And we take interpersonal relationships, even on a commercial level, or in other ways, very, very seriously, with the utmost severity. And never mind when we're talking about capital crimes, because if you were responsible, says the Mishnah, because if you were responsible for the wrong person being executed for a murder, for example, you are not only going to be responsible for their death, but also for the death of their progeny. And the Mishnah there. Quotes the pasuk from a few weeks ago in the parsha, which says, "Kol d'mei achicha tzoakim alai ma'adama." God says to Cain, the bloods of your brother are crying out to me from the ground. So says the Mishnah, why demei, the bloods? It should be dam achicha, the blood singular. The answer is because when you kill somebody, God forbid, you end up ending his line forever. I mean, so all of his progeny, all those people forever and ever and ever, are also not going to are also been destroyed in that one moment. What's important? So, but why? All right. So, when you do the sort of like put the fear of God in the witnesses, that's literally what you do, because it's and I think that's the point that Matityahu Yitzhari is trying to make, and that is that giving testimony in court is not just a function of, it's not a technical function. Yes, justice is important, but that's it. It says no. Doing justice and making sure that the wicked are punished and the righteous are acquitted, and that the people who are oppressed are actually delivered from their oppressors. All of these things are a sacred task. In fact, they are godlike. God is the ultimate judge. God is the judge, and therefore, when we are involved in seeking the truth in a law court, we actually are fulfilling or embodying an action of God. We are involved in a case of imitatio Dei. A case of imitatio Dei, where you imitate God, and that imitation of God, according to Maimonides, is in fact the ultimate basis of all of Jewish morality. But it's more than that. It's much more than that. The one of the it's said making that connection that we're doing something which is godlike when we seek truth in a court. We're actually not just acting like God, but the way that we go about it, and that's where the sort of put the fear of God into the witnesses comes up. The way that we go about it must be in a special modality. In other words, the atmosphere that envelops the court is an atmosphere of sanctity. In order to make this in order to make this point clear, let me quote a pasuk. Let me quote a verse from last week's Sedra. At the beginning of the parsha, the Torah says as follows: "Vayera elav Hashem." God appeared to Avram Avinu, be'elonei Mamre, and the terebinths of Mamre, v'hu yoshev petach ha'ohel kechom hayom. And it was hot in the day. It must have been in the summer. So the Hebron hills are very, very, very hot in the summer. For those of us who live here or have been there in the summer, most of you who don't live in Israel probably have only seen Israel in the summer because that's when most people come to visit. So he's sitting. It's very, very hot. Sitting at the tent, and he's sitting there. Rashi on that verse says as follows: "V'hu yoshev." He was sitting at the door to his tent, but the word yoshev, sitting, it can be written two ways. It can be written yud shin nun, which is called the abbreviated form, or yud vav shin vav yud vav shin. I'll do this again. It could be written, the normal way would be yud vav shin bet yoshev. In other words, the verb which is provided by the vav is written there, or sometimes in Hebrew it's not important. It's not uncommon, certainly not in Chumash, that the vowel is not the verb that serves as the vowel doesn't appear. So you can actually read it yashav. Not only so if that's the case, it would be reading God appeared to him in the terebinths of Mamre, and he sat at the door of his tent. Says Rashi, yashav ktiv, he sat. Mikesh la'amod, he sat, and he wanted to get up because he realized that God was appearing to him. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so God said to him, Shev, you sit. In other words, he wasn't just sitting; he was seated. In other words, God made him sit down. He said, "You sit, vani amod, and I will stand here." V'ata, and the reason why I'm doing this, the reason why I want you to sit while I'm standing, kivayachol, as it were, siman lebanecha. And this will be a sign to your descendants. Sha'atid ani lihyatzev be'adat hadayanim. That when your descendants will sit in judgment as judges, they will sit, because a beit din, the halacha is a beit din, the judges have to sit, and I will stand. V'hein yoshevim, and they're sitting. Emar Elokim nitzav ba'adat. God stands in the midst of among the judges. That's the way they interpret the verse. In other words, what happened, according to our tradition, when a court convenes, it's not just that learned rabbis sit down and they hear a case. It's not just that the witnesses come and they're commanded by the Torah to tell the truth, and that when they tell the truth, they're fulfilling a mitzvah, and that all of them are actually following God's ways and imitating Him, imitatio Dei, in the most basic form, because God, as I said, is the ultimate judge. But in addition to all of that, what Rashi is trying to put across is that God's presence indwells, hovers over the court. In other words, it's not that we are just imitating God, but God somehow is there and we represent Him, capital H, physically, while we're doing His, capital H, work in the court. Now, that's one of the reasons, by the way, why in Batei Din, the practice is either to put a talit on your head during when you sit in the court, or putting a hat on, as a sign of reverence for the fact that God's presence is there. Now the use of this pasuk by Rashi is really striking, because it's a pasuk that, especially Ashkenazim, but not just, used to like to invoke in different connections, and in this they're actually continuing a pattern among the rabbis in the Talmud. What was this pasuk of Hashem nitzav ba'adat kel, that God stands in the congregation of God, among the judges. It's invoked here. It's invoked when people study Torah. It's invoked whenever there's a minyan. It's invoked whenever people say Devarim Shebekdusha, like Kedusha and so on and so forth. In other words, but all right. So if you're talking about a minyan, if you're talking about Torah study, okay, fine, that makes sense. You. Of course, you're part of the act of Torah study. For example, is supposed to be it's a religious gesture. We feel that when you open up a chumash, or you open up a sefer, you open up a gemara, whatever the case might be, that God is somehow invoked and He is there with you. Fine, but what's got to do with the court? So the answer is that no, that the fact that this verse is invoked here too shows the fundamentally and transformatively religious and spiritual nature of the act of judging and the atmosphere that must obtain when the courts convene and when they pursue their deliberations. If that's the case, if that's the case, in light of this comment by the implication of this comment by Rabbi Matityahu Yitzhari, then all of a sudden Shimon ben Shattach's comment makes a lot of it takes even more, takes upon itself even more power. And that is, if you don't do your homework and you don't search for the truth and you lead the witnesses, or you allow yourself to be led by the witnesses, and you're not sharp when you probe the words of the witnesses, you're actually deviating from the task that your master, who's here, is telling you to do. It creates a not just distance, but a contradiction, almost a chasm between what's going on here physically and what's supposed to be going on here spiritually. So therefore, the act of judgment along these lines that Shimon ben Shattach is advocating or describing is very fraught. And Shimon ben Shattach himself had reason to understand how necessary precision and probity and the right sort of all-encompassing atmosphere is to the proper functioning of justice, because he himself had a case where he suffered from that. According to the Talmud Yerushalmi, Talmud Yerushalmi tells the following story. It's actually quoted by Rashi in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. According to this story, one day in some town, don't know where, there were two funerals. There was a great rabbi, pious, righteous person died. Actually, can be a righteous and pious person without being a rabbi too. Let's not kid ourselves. And at the same time, a guy who was really hated, a guy who was a collaborator apparently with the Romans, and really not or whoever. He was a really miserable person who never did anything proper. He was really very hated. He was a miser. He never gave stuck and nothing. Anyways, so as it happened, the two funeral processions left the city at the same time. And when they reached a crossroads, they were attacked by brigands, and everybody ran away and left the two biers, left the two stretchers with the bodies on the ground. They ran away from the highway. When everybody came back, whatever happened, for whatever reason, the two bodies got mixed up, and the rabbi was buried sort of happenstance, without any kind of dignity, with any kind of ceremony, because they thought it was the Chaver Kadisha thought it was this rich miser, terrible person, and the rich miser, terrible person, he was buried as a tzaddik and hero of the Jewish people and a teacher of Torah and all kinds of stuff. Now as it happened, one of the rabbi's students had hidden himself from the brigands not far from where actually the bodies were left, and he saw that there'd been a switch, and it was killing him. That his teacher, who he so admired and so loved and so revered, was buried in such a disreputable manner. And he said, "How? What?" It killed him, and nobody would listen to him. He said, "No, wrong guy." They said, "What are you talking about? Forget it." And that was it. And it really bothered him. So, and he couldn't get it out of his mind. He just felt it was just so unfair. So, according to this story in the Yerushalmi, a couple of nights later, the teacher comes to him in a dream, and he says, "Don't worry, I'm fine. I have my proper place in the Garden of Eden. I'm being God put me in a good place in the next world, and I'm being rewarded for all the good things that I did, and so on and so forth." Um, and the other guy, who was a now I remember, he was a tax collector. He was a customs collector and a miserable SOB to boot. Um, he's in Gehenna. He's in hell where it's 50 degrees in the shade and there's no air conditioning. Don't worry about it. So the student said, but let me ask you a question. Why the switch? Why was it necessary that you should be buried in such a miserable, dismal way, and he should get all this respect and all this honor? So the rabbi said to him, "I'll tell you. Once happened that I was buried in this way. I did not have a proper burial for a simple reason. I once was around in a part of a conversation in which the rabbi in which people were actually gossiping about other rabbis, and I didn't protest, and I should have. And for that reason, I was punished by being kept by not being able to have a proper funeral as befit my status." And the other guy, the bad guy, Baya, which is his name, he never did anything good in his life except for once. He once got ready to throw a huge party for some big shots, and he had food and all kinds of stuff and whatever, and the guy didn't show up. So instead of throwing out the food, he gave it to the poor. And for that the one act of charity that he did in his life, he was rewarded in this way. But now, in the meantime, as we said, he's in hell. So the student asked his rabbi, "How long does he have to be in hell?" So, the rabbi said, "Until his place is taken by Shimon ben Shetach, because there is a outbreak of witchcraft, pagan witchcraft in the year of Ashkelon, in the city of Ashkelon. And Ashkelon was a pagan city, which was full of all kinds of Greco-Roman, Hellenistic practices, which are not acceptable from a Jewish point of view. And he refuses to deal with them. And because he didn't do that, because he didn't do his job, he didn't take care of getting rid of various pagan practices in the land of Israel. He's going to take this guy's place, and the guy will be sprung from Gehenna." And that was the end of the dream. So the student, he satisfies what happened to his teacher, but now he doesn't know what to do with the Shimon ben Shetach. So he ran to Shimon ben Shetach and he said, "This is the dream I had. You got to take care of these witches in Ashkelon." And Shimon ben Shetach did. He actually hanged however many witches it was, which sounds harsh to us, but this is a different age. And did what he's supposed to do. And no, I don't know what happened as a result to the moches, to the tax collector. Except that was not where the story ended. The story ended was that the relatives of these witches ended up framing the son of Shimon ben Shetach. And we talked about Edim Zomamim, about malicious witnesses last week. That's what the case was. And because the judges didn't do their job, and because it was a frame, the son of Shimon ben Shetach was killed, was executed. It was a case of judicial murder. So there are those who say that Shimon ben Shetach was not just speaking in principle, because everything we said up until now is true. It's not, but it's more general. He knew very well. He paid the price himself, personally, of judicial malfeasance, of leading the witnesses, of people, instead of seeing the act of adjudicating justice as an act, a godly thing, which one does in the presence of God. It was rather a tool of vengeance and a tool to exploit for personal gain. So there's a krecht, a sort of a sigh behind this Mishnah. Heve marbelach koret edim. Interrogate the witnesses as much as you possibly can, because if you, obviously these judges didn't, because you pay a terrible price if you don't. The price of injustice and the price of what you will do could be a person's life. And be careful of what you say, because you may end up leading the witnesses. Apparently, this judicial murder was a conspiracy of both the judges and the witnesses, so that it's not just the teacher Shimon ben Shattach and the Pharisee Shimon ben Shattach and the judge Shimon ben Shattach and the brother of the queen Shimon ben Shattach who's speaking here. Behind the words are the pain of a father who knew what would happen were his words not heeded. Okay, so that is it for today. We will see you, please God, next Monday. Again, please take care of yourselves, follow the rules, distancing, masks, and try, even under our not easy circumstances, to live b'simcha. Bye.